Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 77, the topic of secret identities, as selected by our president-level patron, Matt. And for the very first time ever, we have a patron as a guest on the show. So welcome, Matt, for joining us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be a part of this.
Yeah, it's going to be a good, entertaining discussion. Matt and I go way back. We're friends back in college. And as I've alluded to a couple times on the show, Matt and I previously hosted what was basically a radio show. But in hindsight, it was, I guess, a precursor to podcasts before podcasts were really a thing, going back to about 2002. TCNJ Talks. So that was a lot of fun. And Matt is definitely one of the most intellectual and erudite and well-spoken folks that I know, and it's an honor to have him as a patron. And I'm looking forward to some of the input that he's going to have on the show. So,
from Winamp Live in your townhouse to here, it's quite an exciting time.
Yeah, it's been a hell of a journey over these last almost 20 years at this point. Jesus Christ, 20 years. So, yeah, I know.
I actually remember downloading those episodes whenever I would get home on the weekends from my dorm in college and really finding out what you guys thought about many different topics, a lot of them political, of course, but just the way you guys thought about things. I realized definitely that Anthony had the mind and the voice for radio, but the idea that somehow I got roped into this, Anthony, you're also very persuasive.
Thank you. I will take that as a compliment, as I'm sure it was intended, and in no other fashion. Before we get started, I suppose, a couple of bit of housekeeping items. I want to give a shout out to our podcast plug of the week. This week is Nooks and Crannies. Maddie and Evan talk about the politics of everyday life and all the little things that go along with it. It is not safe for work audio, so just an advisement. But you can find them. Their website is nooksandcrannies.podbean.com, and you can find them on basically all major podcast catchers. And so they're good friends of ours, so I figured give them a shout out of the week. And we have mentioned a couple of times that we have a new t-shirt design coming, and that should be up in our TeePublic store. I don't know if it'll be up by the time this episode is aired, but certainly by the end of the month, we will have a new t-shirt logo design. So the very talented Emily, who is the daughter of Kate, the host of Ignorance Was Bliss, is a fantastic design artist, and she has done amazing work. And so Doc and I just have to finish approving the final proofs, and then that will be live for you to go and purchase. So we'll have links up to our TeePublic store. And once that goes up, I'm pretty sure there will be a sale on that design, if not a store-wide sale. And so you can check out all of our merch and buy stuff, not just with our logo on it, but our brand new design. And last, we are recording this on Easter. So happy Easter, belated Easter, and belated happy Passover to all who observe. But the following week, we are recording again with the Mental Health Avengers, and we are looking to get everybody back in time for this one. I know the last episode, The Age of Access, we were a little shorthanded, but we are looking to get the full cadre of cohorts up and running. So this will be Age of Access Part 2, where we discuss several solutions to the access to mental health care. So stay tuned for that. That episode will be coming in a couple of weeks. So that's the housekeeping. We got that out of the way. And now we are on to the topic of discussion, which is secret identities, as posed by Matt. And so I guess normally we go into the background on this, and so we will get into that in just a moment. But I guess, Matt, the first question I have then, since this is sort of brand new territory for all of us, is what inspired you to come up with this topic for an episode?
Well, actually, it was a confluence of a couple of things. Very recently, there was a monumental story in DC Comics called The Truth, which I'm sure we're going to touch on later, in which Superman reveals his alter ego to the public. There's a very involved discussion in that issue, and with the question of whether or not alter egos are even necessary in this day and age, where pretty much anyone can find out anything about you, where even as an alter ego, just in the age of the internet, you don't have a whole lot of privacy to begin with. A lot about you, way more than most people would be comfortable with, is out there in the public domain. And if anybody really intended to find out your identity or anything about you, really, it's a very simple matter for them to do so. And just combining that with a lot of things that we're seeing going on right now with online privacy rights, with issues such as doxing, such as identity theft, and things like that. It draws an interesting corollary between the comic book world and the real world. And I think it's worth discussing whether just the need for anonymity, especially in this day and age, is a psychologically healthy thing.
Really, really fascinating points, all of them. And I remember when you posed it to me, one of the things I did say in response to you was I was hoping that we could get you on the show. And it was just happened to be fortuitous that while Doc and I were in the recording channel getting set up, I saw, oh, Matt is on Discord. So let's invite him over and see if he can join us. So it was fortuitous, but from the moment this topic was proposed, I just immediately started thinking about all of the subtopics that we can really dive into with this. And so, to coin a phrase, my mind is a torrent rivulating with thoughts, or whatever it is that from Blazing Saddles. But there's a lot to work with here. This is an incredibly meaty topic, and I am definitely 150% looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have here on this. So just by way of some background for the handful of folks who I don't even know at this point if there are any of our listeners are unfamiliar with the concept of a secret identity or an alter ego, because if you don't know what a secret identity or alter ego is in comic books, why the hell are you a fan of the show? But secret identities in fiction have certainly existed long before comic books, or at the very least, they definitely predate them. Both the Scarlet Pimpernel and Zorro are very clear examples of characters who adapt an alter ego in order to fight crime or seek revenge or further their personal goals. So that idea is certainly nothing unfamiliar. And then the first comic book character that really has a secret identity at least that I've been able to dig up, was the Phantom, and he predates Superman by about a year. And so the Phantom, we're not going to get into the horrible Billy Zane movie, but the notion that you have someone who is a civilian in their day-to-day life, but then they adopt this persona of a costumed crime fighter. There was a radio show with The Shadow, and Doc knows my love for The Shadow and the character of Lamont Cranston, and we will get to him one of these days. In fact, I was just talking with some folks in a Facebook forum, and somebody mentioned The Shadow, and I said, we are going to get around to him on this show one of these days. So I'm not sure where we'll fit him into the schedule, but Lamont Cranston and The Shadow is another example of a very early pulp type character who carries a persona, carries an alter ego with them in order to fight crime and to keep their personal life separate. And so what we end up seeing is Superman being, in many ways that it was and still is the precursor to a lot of things. The notion of a secret identity existed in comic books for decades. You had Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, Bruce Wayne and Batman, the Flash under his many personae. And so the notion of superheroes always having a secret identity was just sort of accepted, that if you have powers or if you fight crime, you necessarily have to keep your personal and your crime fighting life separate, because the bad guys that you put away will try and seek vengeance upon you in your personal life. And so it's important for them to maintain that clear line of distinction. Then in the 1960s, you introduce the Fantastic Four in Marvel Comics, and they are out and proud, so to speak. And I maybe apologize, maybe I shouldn't use that terminology, But the point is that they do not hide the fact that they are superheroes. And even though they have the names of Mr. Fantastic and Human Torch and The Thing and the Invisible Woman, everybody knows that's Reed Richards and Sue Richards and Johnny Storm and Ben Grimm. And so the idea of whether or not it is necessary or valid for superheroes to have a secret identity then gets called into question. I know prior to this, there were so many stories of Superman having to come up with all manner of trickery and disguises, etc., to prevent Lois Lane, the Snoopy reporter, from finding out who he was. And Jimmy Olsen, it's the same thing. And then the Fantastic Four come along and they go, yeah, we're superheroes and we're also real people. And here's our house. Here's the Baxter building. We live here. We operate out of here. We don't care. We are out as superheroes. And so that, I think, really triggered a big discussion as to whether or not that was necessary. And so since then, there have been a lot of interesting stories that have called that into question. I know, Matt, you mentioned The Truth with Superman. There was the very famous story in Civil War where Peter Parker unmasked himself, revealed himself as Spider-Man during a press conference, causing J. Jonah Jameson to basically pass out. And then that was later retconned so that everybody forgot that he was Spider-Man. Same thing with Daredevil. Matt Murdock was out and then enacted a whole big thing where all of a sudden then everybody forgot that Matt Murdock and Daredevil were one and the same. So what this ultimately comes down to is, on the one hand, secret identities are defended as a way to allow the public to have or as a way to allow the hero to have a private life, as well as protect their loved ones, because so often we see that famous trope, that story of the hero's girlfriend or the hero's sidekick, that the villain finds out who they are and then they go after the loved ones. So the secret identity is a way to protect them. But we've also seen the story time and time again where the hero has to go to such great lengths to hide their secret identity from the folks who only know them in their private life, that they don't know that they're really a superhero, and they have to go to outlandish extremes and often push people away. This creates issues in relationships, both personal and romantic. And so there's a host of problems associated with the very notion of a secret identity, and it's been mined for literally decades in comic books and in fiction in general. So Matt's primary question, the thing that I want to kick this discussion off with as we move into the issues, is, are alter egos, or as Matt said, anonymity in general, to bring it into the real world, is it psychologically healthy? And so I think before I fully kick the question over to Doc, Matt, is there anything else you want to add on to that question, or did I sum it up pretty straightforward?
No, you summed it up pretty straightforward. And as I was saying while I was pitching this to you, I can see both sides of this argument. There was we were talking about Civil War there for a bit, and there was a famous Spider-Man arc leading into that called Mr. Parker Goes to Washington, where there was a large discussion about this actually before a congressional subcommittee that was examining the Superhero Registration Act, and Spider-Man tried to give them the explanation of the doctrine of proportionate response, where it takes somebody to be able to operate in the shadows to deal with people that also operate in the shadows, that also hide behind masks, and the congressperson that he was explaining that to countered with the argument about loved ones being in danger, and that police officers, prosecutors, and people in political positions have to deal with that all the time as well. But they do it anyway because their loved ones want it that way. So there really is two very good arguments on either side of this issue, I would say.
Very well stated. So, Doc, I'll let you, I guess, handle the psychological impact of that first.
Sure. The first thing to say is that you have to have your main identity before you can have a secret identity. So most comics to this point usually use that format of whoever it is was a typical blank that led to such and such event happening, and therefore they now have to be alter ego X. So that format is tried and true. But that's not really different than anything that anyone else goes through in life. In other words, if you, as has already been pointed out, decided at some point that you were going to join the police academy and you were going to protect and serve those around you in society, then you knew that there were going to be certain things that were explained to you that were going to be increased risk for yourself. And in theory, if anyone else were around you, they'd be put at risk as well. So that's a situation where you know what you're going to be doing. The part that becomes even more interesting for superheroes is often they don't know and they have to make a choice with what's been dealt unexpectedly. So when you're placed in those types of circumstances, I think a lot of people, if you, for example, were in the witness protection program, they do everything in their power to make sure that the people that are targeting you don't know who you are, where you are, who you know, what you usually do on a daily basis. They actually create identities for people in the worst case scenarios. So this isn't something that's totally new. Forget comics. The best example with Superman, aka Clark Kent, is that he can't be Superman all the time. If he had to just simply live that way, he would go insane. And I know we now have the whole, the truth story arc going on, but even before that, he always made it clear he didn't view himself completely as Superman. Meanwhile, someone like Batman is the complete opposite. He views himself as Batman and he has to put on the facade of Bruce Wayne because that's what everyone else around him expects, because if he's Batman, they'll drive them insane. So these are the type of social barriers that we like to create, not just because it quote unquote protects people, but it gives our brains an opportunity to do something different in different moments. So I'll use myself as an example. I'm a doctor. I don't like to think of myself as a doctor all the time. I like to think of myself as a husband, as a father, as a fun loving friend. But in theory, if I were just purely doctor issues, that means that every conversation I have to check and make sure that a person is not suicidal. I have to figure out what their potential psychosis is, what's the best medication, all while I'm just trying to ask my wife how her day is going. That doesn't sound like that would be healthy to me either. But I also don't go so far as to, no matter what, say, by the way, don't ever mention work to me if I'm at home, because I have to keep things absolutely separate. I have to protect confidentiality of people, which is important, but I don't have to create such a strong artificial barrier that can never be breached. So that's the part that superheroes and villains seem to exaggerate on. But I think we're always in a spectrum of doing this. There are going to be things that we don't want immediately put on the forefront. And there are always going to be things that we want to control before other people have a chance to react. So that's the piece that I think is healthy. If you can determine ahead of time what's going to be important to you and how you want to present it to others, it doesn't have to be picture perfect, but it at least means that you can put the type of effort and thought in that you get the best results. I think the problems come when people feel like they're thrown into a situation where they either have to create deception, where they have to feel like they're lying, or they just have to outright deny a part of themselves that they never they never thought people would ask about, or people would be interested in. The most classic thing, as you kind of hinted at with the Fantastic Four, although clearly this was never their intention, was the idea that, my lifestyle is a little different than other people's, but I can't just say it, uh, you know, and now even that's changing. So these are all the things that go into this discussion. Is it healthy? I think it's healthy to have shades of gray and have ability to discuss it with people and not have everyone know everything about you. I don't think it's healthy if you have to suppress a part of yourself that you think is important to your existence and anything outside of that is just going to be emotional chaos. So, as Matt already alluded to, I think you could spin it both ways.
Well, he has some, I guess, real life corollaries that he can draw upon, and we're going to get into. But I do think that this is something, and you did allude to it briefly in your discussion, that we all, to some extent, understand what that's like because we all wear different hats, and each one of us, it plays a different role depending on our location, depending on the time of day or time of year, whatever the case may be. That we all wear different hats and we all play different roles, and we don't always need to be one thing to all people at all times. And I think that's a very important point that is made and that you made during your discussion. And that's something that I certainly think that all of our listeners and everyone, literally everyone, can understand. It doesn't have to be a superhero thing. Just earlier today, my wife was saying that we were working in the den. Perfect example. We were working in the den and we were painting while our son was sleeping. And she said, "This is the first thing I've done in a while that doesn't make me feel like either a vet or a mother." She said, "I feel like I can just do something where I'm not locked into either, okay, I have to focus on being, a mother to our son, or I have to answer questions about sick or dying animals. Like I can just do this and put those thoughts out of my head." And it was very refreshing for her to have that opportunity because of everything going on with COVID-19 and so on and so forth. I think everybody's under a lot of stress right now, and we're all sort of, we're forced to wear multiple hats at the same time and be multiple things to multiple people simultaneously. And that is incredibly mentally taxing. So the opportunity to say, okay, here I'm going to do this, and then over here I'm going to worry about that, I think is freeing to some extent in a psychological sense, that it gives you that opportunity that you can put things away and you can take a break from certain roles, certain life choices or certain decisions that you would have to make and that you will have to come back to, but you don't have to think about them right now.
Yeah, that's great, and I mean that parallels a lot with the in-depth conversation that happened in The Truth, where when Superman was talking it over with the person that he was talking to, Adam Strange, Strange mused that Clark Kent and Superman may have just been two people who needed two different things from life originally, and then gradually that they just merged into a single identity. And I think there you have the possibility of those different hats kind of blending into each other and bleeding into each other in what wound up being a fairly healthy way.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that there is a long history. And again, we keep coming back to Clark Kent, Superman, because I think he is probably the ultimate example, and certainly the one that I think everybody is most familiar with. But it's the notion of also who is we know that Clark Kent is the public identity and then Superman is his secret identity, but who does he consider to be his real identity? And I think that there's a history of stories being mined from that and I think Doc alluded to it earlier, that deep down, he believes himself to be Clark Kent is who he is, and Superman is the facade. And you contrast that with Batman, where Batman is who he really is and Bruce Wayne is the facade. And I think in some ways that's a facetious discussion, because I think that they're all real. And like we're saying, that you can be, Doc can be both, a husband and a father and Dr. Issues. I can be both an attorney and a husband and a father. And so, and a podcast host and all those many things. I don't have to do them all at the same time, but they're all still a part of who I am. And so I think the notion that that Clark Kent is who he really is and Superman is the facade, or Batman is who he really is and Bruce Wayne is the facade, I think that does a disservice, but that's a topic for another discussion. So I guess then, and we've got in our show notes here, we've got two things, and I would say we've got the upside and the downside to real life corollaries of the notions of anonymity. But I initially had them as the upside and then the downside. Do we want to talk about maybe the downside to the anonymity first and then end with the positives? Or do we want to go good then bad. I'm always of the mindset that I'd rather get the bad news first and then end on the good news, but I don't know what everybody else thinks.
I will defer to you guys. I'm the guest.
Oh, I don't. It doesn't matter to me either way. I'll take it as it comes. So,
All right. So Doc doesn't care either way. So let's start with the downside then. And this is something that, again, Matt had mentioned when we were initially discussing this as a potential topic. Anonymity. We've all dealt with the anonymous troll. We've dealt with the anonymous poster on a message board. We've seen things. We've seen it on social media. People use the fact that they are, quote unquote, hiding behind a keyboard to say some really nasty and negative things. And again, I'm going to take this opportunity just to hop up briefly on my soapbox and my little pedantic thing that a troll is not somebody who says something negative. A troll is somebody who says something intentionally to elicit a response from you, whether that is good, bad, or otherwise. That is what trolling is. Trolling is not just the automatic attacking of somebody. If you're just out and out attacking somebody, you're not trolling them, you're harassing them. There's a difference. So I just have to say that because I am a prescriptivist when it comes to grammar. And I believe that's the term. But in any case, trolling means something very particular. If you just say that all internet harassment is trolling, then you diminish the meaning of the term, like literally. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there. I apologize. Anonymity. We've got doxing where people find out where it's typically anonymous. And I say anonymous as the collective, not just someone being anonymous, but rather the collective of internet savvy users who utilize anonymity to attack targets they deem to be deserving of attacks. I'm really trying to parse my words here because I don't want to piss off anonymous myself. So doxing is the release of information, private personal information like addresses, telephone numbers. Sometimes it can be bank records if they really get into it. And it can really impact a person's life. It can really do damage to them because now they are under constant scrutiny or harassment. We've read so many stories about people having to move and hide and or change their names because they've been doxxed online and they've been harassed by strangers, literal strangers who are, again, anonymous to them. So that creates a whole host of issues. Swatting, the idea that somebody could be sitting in their house playing a video game and some other random person says, "Oh, I know where this person lives. Wouldn't it be really funny if I sent a SWAT team to their door saying that they've got people being held hostage or they're in the process of committing a crime?" And then I get to watch this all unfold because they're streaming. And then next thing you know, police burst into the door in full riot gear with weapons pointed at them, getting ready to shoot somebody who's just playing Fortnite or Minecraft or what have you. This is a very real thing and it carries very real penalties. Just this morning or yesterday, I was reading a story about a gentleman in Florida who was calling large pizza orders for first responders that he had no intention of paying for, but he's saying, "Oh yeah, we want, 100 pizzas delivered to this firehouse or this police station or whatever." And many of these pizzerias are based in New Jersey, where, Doc and Matt and I all live in New Jersey. And one pizzeria went out of business because they spent a lot of money making all these pies and the order was never fulfilled. So they lost all this money. These are so many instances. And again, I could go on for hours really on stories of folks using the internet and the idea of anonymity to harass and to hurt other people. And so this is one of the, I guess, points for one of the downsides of the notion of anonymity and the idea of maintaining a distinction between, or I guess it's an argument against maintaining a distinction between your private life and your public life, that if you have to respond on an internet post with your real name, you're much less likely to say something that can come back to bite you in the ass, which is also one of the reasons why I personally don't use anything other than my real name for the overwhelming majority of my internet posts, whether it's Reddit, Twitter, etc. Everything is Anthony Sitko because I'm the only Anthony Sitko in the world out of 7.5 billion people. I'm the only one. And so if you see me say it, I would be willing to say it to your face. But not everybody likes that. And so this creates some very downsides. I've rambled on long enough, so I'll let Matt speak a little bit, and then I'll let Doc come up with some of the psychological answers.
Right. Well, to just build upon what you were saying, it not only the dark side of anonymity in terms of you wouldn't say that to somebody's face, but when you have an incident like a doxing incident or a swatting incident, and you alluded to it, but there have been very, very serious consequences to these things, including in the instances of swatting. There have been at least two distinct instances where police have burst into people's homes who were the victims of swatting, and because of just the confusion of the moment, wound up shooting and killing the people. It's not only the matter of whether or not you would say something if you had to sign your real name to it, or take an action if you had to be public about it, that you wouldn't if you were anonymous. It can be very difficult to track down people who have committed what are actual crimes when they go beyond just posting something nasty on a message board. And that creates very serious problems, and it can be very hard to apply the proper consequences to it. And so in that case, it's very, very difficult to see the need to do that kind of action. And again, it's action and consequence. It's what motivates you, what is in your heart while you're employing this anonymity. But it's very difficult to see the need to do that as healthy. And I don't know if that extends from the need to be anonymous or just the need to mess around with people in a very dangerous way. And I guess I'll let Doc handle that one.
Okay. So I think both of you have hit on the main points, but it really is that threshold. In other words, it's not just whether or not people have anonymity and can do something that they would consider to be personally private. And it's not just that it affects other people, be it on the small scale or on the large scale. It is that you have, and I'm going to use the original internet term for it. Anthony knows this from previous episodes, the forum. I'm not stupid enough to say something that would get the Secret Service at my door and saying something about the president, because even though I have free speech, making direct threats is something that gets the attention of everyone involved. But if I had the assurance or the likelihood that there is more a chance than not that I'm going to be able to say something and nobody can retaliate quickly, then I do get a certain level of courage. I do get a certain level of bravado. I mean, it's something that most people can't get in other parts of their lives. And so it creates this fantasy. Ironically, the whole point of it is creating a fantasy that you're untouchable. You know that you actually do develop this temporary superpower, that you have this control over what happens to other people, and they can't do anything back to you. I mean, that's the perception. Is it true? If you work hard enough, a person can do something back online, yes, but most people don't want to take that effort. So it creates an imbalance, and people take advantage of that imbalance. So unfortunately, it is usually a situation where a person just wants to create more power for themselves. And that leads to the typical endorphin rush, ego boost that you're going to see. And unfortunately, it doesn't exactly have something to yield negative consequences. At least when it comes to other addictions, you take a certain drug, you're going to get the downside to it at some point physiologically. If you do something that's a crime that people witness, then you know you're running the risk of getting in trouble for it. So you either do the crime less, in theory, or well, these are the risks I'm taking, so I probably need to be even more careful. With all of this stuff online, especially, it's such a hit or miss situation that people can do this for who knows how long and get away with it and not have to worry about the consequence. I've actually been in the situation where I've had a person where this happened to them, and I've also had the opportunity to speak to people that have done it. And on both sides, uh, they both said they hope they never go through this again, because the idea that their fantasy world has now been brought into what they consider now to be their own reality is too painful. I'm talking about the person that not just did it and thought it was funny, or thought that, I don't know, that they were never going to get caught and now they are. Uh, They actually thought that, well, even if they did get caught, people would, this is going to sound so perverse, but people were going to be like, "Oh, you're that guy? Oh man, that was incredible!" Like almost seeking adulation. I hate to say it this way because I think it's so wrong, but that so far has been my direct experience with people that were in it in the moment. But reading about it seems like it really takes a wide range of personalities and motivations. Some people make it very personal, as if the people that they've met online are their direct friends, and sometimes that's true, but other times it's a situation where that person has only developed that relationship in their own schema. It's not a two-way street. I think a lot of that has to do with this. When we're dealing with a series of parallel events or mirrored events where we think it's a two-way street, it's not. It's one-way streets going in opposite directions. And that's not the same thing psychologically.
Interesting. Interesting. I can't say that I'm entirely surprised at the idea that someone would be thinking that they would be lauded for taking a particular action that that you're that guy, because I do think so much of it is attention seeking. And again, I could be entirely off base here. After all, only one of the three of us here on the call is or on this forum is a psychiatrist with psychological training. But I do think that to some extent a lot of it is attention seeking behavior, that they're doing this either for the crabs in a bucket mentality, because like with the example of I'll use swatting, that, oh, they're a successful streamer, I'm going to really mess with them, and this is going to be really funny, or it's because they want that endorphin rush, that they want that thrill of being able to say, oh, okay, this is what, I'm the one who did this. Aren't I funny? Aren't I hilarious? And I do also think, and I don't remember if it was Matt or Doc who brought up the notion of consequences and everything, but I do think that to some extent, a lot of folks, when they're doing this, they don't see the immediacy of the consequences. Either they don't see it or they don't care, whether it's doxing or swatting or something, really, really negative like that. They don't, there's a disconnect between the action and the consequences. And I think the anonymity creates that, or at the very least, it exacerbates it. And so I don't know how you resolve that while still maintaining the anonymity, because as we're going to get to in a moment, anonymity can be very beneficial and sometimes even vitally necessary. So, so I guess before we move on to the topic, is there anything else that either Doc or Matt want to add about this idea?
No, I think we can move on.
Agree.
Okay. All right. So that being the case, then we just talked about a lot of the negatives of anonymity, but there are positives to it as well. As we alluded to with the superheroes, the idea of keeping that separate alter ego allows them to maintain some privacy for their personal life, which is a very important topic. It's very important for us as human beings psychologically that we have some semblance of privacy, something that only we or a very select few group of people are aware of. I think that plays a huge role in maintaining a healthy self-esteem and a healthy psychological aspect of oneself. You also have the idea that, and this is a real life corollary, people in dangerous positions or very public positions, they do dangerous things, or they interact with the sort of people who may be potentially seeking revenge. I have a couple of friends who are prosecutors, and some of them don't have Facebook, or if they do have Facebook, they're under a different version of their name, or they're not using their real full name because they are responsible for locking up criminals. And these criminals may want to take revenge depending on what happened. And so you have that idea of wanting to protect yourself from revenge. Similarly, you also have the notion of wanting to perhaps speak out against the government. We look back at the Federalist Papers and Publius, and the idea that this was a pseudonym being used by several of the founding fathers to speak out against the British government and for the idea of the creation of a brand new United States government. We see a lot of this even happening nowadays with, say what you will about Edward Snowden, but the notion that he was operating and leaking things anonymously before he decided to out himself. But the idea that folks are leaking information that could be helpful to certain people, but potentially personally damaging to them, either professionally or again personally. Whistleblowers is another example. We just saw it with the impeachment hearings not that long ago. The idea of there being this whistleblower that needed to, they needed to protect their identity, and some folks chose not to respect the idea of whistleblower anonymity. But the point is that you have to allow for people to be able to do the right thing without fear of reprisal or repercussions. And so that's where anonymity comes into play. And so there is an upside to that. I know we were just speaking about the ways that anonymity can be used for bad, but it can be used for good. And so before we allow Doc to answer, Matt, I know, this sort of hits home for you personally a bit as we were discussing, offline, but what are some of the other ways that you feel that anonymity can be used in a healthy or a positive way?
Sure, and I'll go. You touched on many of the examples in which it's good to do it for reasons of needing to protect yourself from persecution politically or lawfully. But there have also been instances such as Alice Sheldon and Marianne Evans and many other historical female authors who could not get published regardless of talent because of their sex. And so they published under nom de plumes, which were men. There are many instances of needing to do it because of societal standards that may be outmoded or may just not afford a person a chance to exercise their utility under their own name. So I will turn it over there.
All right. Anonymity is the ultimate pivot point when it comes to power in society. It has the potential for that. And so I'm going to go ahead and use the medical realm, the psychological realm as an example. There are many things that are highly stigmatized in society. It doesn't have to be just mental health, which we already know has a huge stigma to it. But let's consider things like sexually transmitted infections or erectile dysfunction for men, or an unfortunate diagnosis of a type of cancer that may or may not be terminal. The types of things that are going to greatly impact a lot of people in terms of family, in terms of work, in terms of just overall day-to-day living. So we know as doctors, we have to keep that information as confidential as possible so that the person has the opportunity when they think it's appropriate to let people know. At the same time, we also have to make sure the people around us are safe as a society. So things like someone having HIV or syphilis are actually reported to the state. So we're always walking this line of making sure that people have a certain level of agency in what information they say and don't say, but also making sure that the people around us have things that are important to know about individuals. So how do you balance that? The way I like to look at it is, what does the greatest amount of benefit and what does the least amount of harm? So the real simple things are things that are quote unquote embarrassing. In other words, even if I personally don't have an issue with saying that I have a significant anxiety disorder, that doesn't mean that another person isn't going to feel differently about it. So it's not my choice to say, "Oh yeah, I'll tell everybody about that." Of course not. But you guys were mentioning people being put in harm's way. I mean, I'm a person that's been assaulted in the emergency room, and it was purely because I was a doctor. So I know what that's like. But at the same time, I realized that had nothing to do with my name. It had everything to do with my position, with my title. So whether or not someone had more personal information about me, it may have made it a worse attack if they tried to do it again and they knew where I lived. But that I realize is information anybody can get online anyway. So I don't want to sound like I'm a hypocrite with all of this. I use the term doc issues not because I'm trying to protect my family from some horrible, unspeakable cruelty. I use it because I personally just don't like attention. So I can see where this can be abused, but at the same time, I think it's allowed me to have the types of discussions that won't bring my employer under more scrutiny. Because if I have to speak for other people instead of just speaking for myself, it could create the situation where there's so much bureaucracy and so many other factors that the message gets muddied. So I never want that to happen. I want people to know that what I'm saying is really what I'm thinking. And you can rest assured that that's what's happening with this podcast. That doesn't mean that anything I'm saying when I'm in my work environment is not the same doctor issues. It's just that I know that I'm also representing a lot more people than just what my name is. So the anonymity is a huge boon because it means that I know people want a different perspective of the same person. And I can't recreate that any other way. This was something that I really struggled with when we started this podcast. My personal anonymity is not to protect myself from some massive event or anything of the sort. It's just simply, I wanted to make sure that the voice that you hear is purely doc issues. And I'm not speaking for my employer as a whole, because that level of bureaucracy can really change the message. And that's not my intention. Having said that, when I'm speaking as the other person, quote unquote, it's not a secret identity. It's not a fake identity. It's simply acknowledging that there are many other considerations I have to make when I'm in that role. And so it doesn't change my goal. My goal remains positive. I still want to help as many people as I can when it comes to mental health. The way that I do it in those roles is going to change based on whether or not I'm using the anonymous doc issues or I'm using and if you know some of the Easter eggs I've dropped in the past, you could probably tell who I am. And if you've seen us on YouTube, you could tell who I am. So it's not a matter of all of this superhero stuff. It's purely to make sure that things don't get muddied. That's the best way I can put it. So when people are in high positions of power or doing secret missions in the military or anything like that, I don't hesitate about it. And believe it or not, I think comics do give good examples, whether they meant to or not. And I'll go back to our Superman conversation. For years, especially not just in the comics, but in any other iteration, what's the main difference between Clark Kent and Superman? It's the glasses. No one in their right mind thinks that that actually makes the disguise. It's the cadence in how they both talk, how they carry themselves, all of it. But more importantly, how far do people really go? They're water cooler conversations. They're not to the point, usually, of saying, I want to find out everything immediately about this guy that I think is Superman, and therefore I want to make sure that I'm absolutely certain that there's no funny business going on. No, it's not about that. There's what I like to call a secret contract. In other words, most people in society kind of acknowledge, yeah, this guy probably has something else, but if it's not something that's hurting anybody, I'm not going to push it. And when you have that type of agreement, it can go on indefinitely. That's what people do in relationships all the time. I'll take it to it's not a positive. I'm not claiming it's a positive, but I'm saying a lot of people in certain industries that do a lot of travel, what happens on the road stays on the road, and I know the at this point, the brand line, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, whatever. The point still stands. So from that standpoint, we've come a pretty far way as a society to acknowledge that nobody's perfect and nobody's going to do everything the exact right way. And if people are doing things in one capacity and it doesn't exactly translate into another capacity, we're very forgiving. I've noticed. Uh, and if we're not, then we realize that we're living in glass houses. So we don't want too many people throwing a whole bunch of stones because everybody just gets cut.
Very well said. And I do think that, speaking to the greater issue about that is definitely something, you said the hidden contract or the secret contract. I don't know that that's secret per se. I just think that's part of social contract theory in general, is the idea that, we don't do deep dives into other people because we can't. We don't have the time, we don't have the mental capacity to take on all of that information. So it gets, I don't want to say ignored, but it gets, sort of swept aside and just say, well, whatever, it is what it is. And you live with it accordingly. So, but again, that's one of those things that doesn't get really discussed much for one reason or another. So, all right, well, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we will get into, I guess, there's not really treatment per se, but we'll get into some real life discussions and ways that we can parallel some of the things that happen in universe and out of universe. So stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Remember the first time you held a controller? That first cartridge you blew into so you could get that stinking game to work? What about your first comic you read? The first time you saw Star Wars years and years and years ago? Now you're an adult working full-time to provide for you and your family. But even after all of your hard work, you still make it your quest to spend time with your kids, hoping they find even the slightest interest in some of the things that you had grown up loving. Video games, movies, comics, My Little Ponies. Join me, Kyle Federline, every Wednesday morning on my quest as I discuss with guests what it's like to raise a kid and watch them take after some of our own interests as kids, or have no interest at all in the things that we had grown up loving. This is Parent Quest. Head on over to Anchor and ask me your questions, leave me a voice message, and follow me on Twitter at Parent Quest Pod, Instagram and Facebook at Parent Quest.
Hi, this is Chris.
And this is Brian.
And we are the hosts of Inner Demons, the Ghost Rider podcast.
And you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and other podcast apps for all your Ghost Rider needs.
Ride on.
Hello, I'm Chris Claremont. You're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So normally this is where we talk about treatment options, but since this is one of the thematic episodes, we will, I guess, delve into some of the discussions between corollaries or discussions about corollaries between real life and in-universe information. So I'm not really sure exactly how to proceed with this. So Matt, I guess since this is your idea, I'll let you lead, and then Doc will follow up with the questions or responses, as it were.
Sure. I guess the real world corollaries. I mean, we touched on them earlier in the show, but just we spoke on the law enforcement professionals and prosecutors and things like that needing to operate from anonymity, and I think we did a pretty good job of covering that in full. I would say where I would like to just dive in a little deeper is: do you think that these issues that we spoke about with a need for self-expression in a society or a world that might not be open to it or might react very harshly to it, is it a product of our technological development, would you say? Is it a product of everything being instantaneous and everything being online now? Or did this dichotomy exist pre-internet? What would you think about that?
Well, that's a great question. I think that we've had the capability of doing this for a long time, but it was amplified and accelerated thanks to the internet, thanks to technology as a whole. Let's be honest. Who here remembers prank calls? Crank Yankers was one of those things that.
You got the Beanie Baby?
Thank
Is
you.
Carmelo looking for the Beanie Baby?
So we know that this is something that could have been going on for a much longer period of time, but the fact that we are not the natives of it gives a little different perspective. The fact that there are now not several generations, but several years worth of human beings on this planet that know no other way besides online conversation as the main way to have a discussion of topics and how to get an emotional response to multiple people in a quick manner. And as you mentioned, Matt, instant gratification of it all. Yeah, that takes it to a much bigger level. And the good news is the treatment or the techniques that you can use to combat it don't have to be that much different. In other words, if a person wants to anonymously talk to someone about what they're going through, we do have hotlines. If a person wants to have a one-on-one conversation in person, we still do that. I know social distancing makes it a little different for the time being, but actually that has, in a strange way, allowed for telepsych, which is something that I'm very familiar with because I've been doing it for the past several years, way before this whole pandemic started. So that avenue has become much more reliable and is a better way for many people to have the type of connection that they're used to. So looking at it from that lens, I don't think it has to be radically different than anything else that we deal with. If a person has a part of their life that they feel like they can't talk to with anyone else besides a professional, then you'll get it one way or another. And the fact that the standard is still to remain anonymous with the person that you're talking with is also a benefit. Now, there is a little bit of a technique that I'm going to introduce that doctors know, but a lot of people don't, because there's such a thing in employee assistance programs where you can receive help in terms of counseling for whatever is on your mind. But for a lot of doctors, what they are looking for is and believe it or not, you could actually do this and drive down local neighborhoods and find this. You would have the typical classic shingle for a doctor. So I'll go ahead and say Dr. Issues, MD, but it wouldn't give a specialty. And usually when someone does that, it implies that it's a primary care person. So, your family doctor, regular internal medicine, pediatrician, whatever. But then right after that, it would say something like APA or FAPA or DFAPA. The APA part was the American Psychiatric Association or fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. That's the level I'm at. And then, or distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. I'll never be that. But the point is, it was a hint at I'm a specialist in this particular area. And therefore, because I'm not advertising anything else, I'll be able to see you. You'll be able to see me. People will think it's a typical primary care visit, so they won't pry. And yet that I specialize in other healthcare providers. So this is not a complete secret. Otherwise, I wouldn't say it out loud at all. But the point is, there's a level of anonymity that goes above and beyond just standard patient-doctor confidentiality. And some people need that, or some people crave that, because they think if anybody in any capacity knew, and they may be right, it would destroy them. It would destroy them career-wise. It would destroy them politically. They may actually have enemies that would love to have that kind of quote-unquote dirt. So That's the one wrinkle that is different compared to most other circumstances. But the good news is there are specific resources for police officers, for first responders. The best thing you can do is pretty much cater to your audience because we don't know. I can't pretend to say just because I work in an ER, I know exactly what EMTs go through. That's not true. Or what a police officer or a soldier or a district attorney, whatever it is. I can't pretend to say I have gone exactly what they've gone through. But peers do know that. And peers that are trained in the basics of crisis counseling can help with that as well. But more importantly, it's true for everyone. There is always someone that can be trained in your particular occupation to be a counselor. And if you don't have that, then you can learn to be one yourself. So there's significant opportunity to make sure that if you feel like you're in an unsafe spot, that you cannot talk to anyone, you can find a way. And people are willing to actually train other people to do this. If you call the National Suicide Hotline and you point out that you're interested, you're not wasting their time but in asking, because they'll point you directly to the resources to do that. The fact that people don't know this, I think, is a travesty. And I'll admit, shame on me for not thinking of mentioning this earlier in previous episodes, but because it's not something that immediately comes to mind. We want people to have the proper resources, but for those specialty areas, it's always a good idea to seek out people yourself. And I'm going to take it even a step further. For example, during this pandemic, within our system, we found out from a survey within our network that if physicians had an employee assistance program that was not a physician, they only responded about 17% of the time. But the second that they found out that it was not just a physician, but it was someone that worked within their network, if they felt like they were under an emotionally disturbed process, they'd be willing to respond approximately 70 to 80% of the time. So this is something that we had never thought of. We never thought that it made that big a difference, but apparently it does.
It's amazing. All right. And I guess I'll build on that with a kind of an in-universe examination. When I was pitching this to Anthony, I had mentioned the major difference between the two main universes and the nature of superheroes and anonymity. In the Marvel universe, historically, it's been superheroes have been a whole lot more counterculture. They're largely recognized as vigilantes, as operating outside of the law. Many superheroes, such as Spider-Man and Daredevil and Luke Cage, and the heroes who work closer to the streets, so to speak, have had a lot more reason to try to hide their identities, because not only are there enemies after them, but a lot of the people in law enforcement might be after them as well. The DC universe historically has been a whole lot more idealistic in nature. The superheroes there, Justice League in particular, works side by side with the United Nations Charter. Individual superheroes work side by side with the police officers and prosecutors and the first responders in the particular cities in which they call home. I guess structurally, societally, is it easier, and is it healthier, and would it have more of an effect for people if there were more official societal and cultural support for the type of work that people do that normally they feel would need to be anonymous? And then I guess to bring that to the real world, if we were less extreme punishing of people who express views that might not be considered popular, considered, I guess, socially acceptable in the current time and place and the snapshot in time, would there be less of a need for anonymity in the way that people engage in self-expression, which is an obvious, healthy activity to partake in life?
I think you're preaching to the choir with that one. That sounds like a discussion that Anthony and I have on a regular basis. In terms of, it's amazing how typecast we've made things where, I think, as Anthony says it, the idea of the other. If, in other words, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. And if you can't see another point of view, then clearly you deserve to be ostracized. You deserve to be ridiculed. At this point, I don't even think it has anything to do with anonymity. I think it's gotten to the point where it's almost celebrated to treat people that way at times. Thankfully, I don't think it's overwhelming, but I could, in my own dystopian head, I could see that going that route. But I do appreciate that. From what I've seen so far, I think the world with this pandemic, in many ways, is responding in a way that's similar to the DC universe. The idea that I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm getting phone calls randomly of from people I know, but just saying, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm okay." And they're like, "No, no, no. How are you doing? In other words, how are you doing with all of this as a physician? How are you handling this? Are you okay? Thank you for what you do." And so on that level, I think the DC model is something that we're starting to see. And I think this can be a great opportunity. Having said that, I definitely have seen many times where it's been the complete opposite, where if you voice any concerns or things that you don't think are going well, then you basically get dismissed. You get shot down. I'm not saying fired, but there are certain things that you're not supposed to say. But you have to know the right people to talk to about those concerns, be it on the job or any other circumstance. So I'm not so sure that we'll ever get to the point that everyone can feel so open that we don't have to worry about quote unquote keeping secrets. But I think we have an angle now that the world had never seen, where we realize just how important it is to stay in touch with one another in a way that we never have before, because we've never been in a situation where we had this type of technology where we could maintain that contact, but still physically not have to be in front of each other. So it's just such a strange time right now. It really is. It really does feel like out of the comics. So, of all the times to bring up a topic like this, I think it's amazing. I'll put it this way: part of what I do, we have court reviews for patients if they're still in the hospital, and I've had the opportunity to see. The the public defender's home. I've had an opportunity to see the judge's home. I've had an opportunity to see the court adjuster's home, the stenographer's home. I mean, it's interesting what their living rooms and their bedrooms and their basements look like, and yet nobody cares because we're all saying like, look, we're all in this together, so we might as well make it an experience that we're at least going to be comfortable. So this is unheard of in any other time. So I think right now we're experiencing a bit of that shift. At least I hope we are, for the better.
Back to your point, I want to interject real quick, is I think thank you for bringing up, by the way, my comments about the other. I think what I hope will happen is after all of this dies down, and this, of course, is the idealist, the naive idealist in me speaking, is the fact that we're all going through this together. Every single one of us. And the fact that this disease doesn't care where you live, it doesn't care how much you make, it doesn't care what your racial background is, it doesn't care who you voted for, it doesn't care about any of that. This disease is killing humans, not just Americans, it's killing humans. And that at the end of all of this, by whatever grace of whatever data you choose to believe in or not, that maybe somebody, the majority of us will wake up and go, we're really not all that different, because if I need a blood transfusion, I'm not asking who they voted for. I'm not asking who they pray to. I'm not asking what country they come from. I'm not asking about their income bracket. I'm asking, do they have a blood type that matches me? That's all I'm concerned with. Can they help me? Because they're a fellow human. And I think at the end of all of this, what we really have to do collectively as a society and as a species is look at what this disease, what this pandemic has done to us as a society, as a people, and as a planet. Because, I could go off on the environmental impacts and the fact that, pollution has dropped, the fact that the earth has been shaking far less than it normally has in allow size to pick up. tremors that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to pick up because the background noise that we make on a regular basis is dropped. The fact that there are fish swimming in places where they wouldn't otherwise swim. We are basically living in a slightly smaller version of the world post Thanos' snap. If you want to draw the corollary to a pop culture thing, we are living right now in a world where the world is a lot quieter. And frankly, I think at this point, if there's anybody that sees all that's happened just over the past month and a half, and you still don't believe that humans have an impact on the climate and pollution and so on and so forth, then there's no helping you. But getting back to the point is, I think what we need to do is collectively realize that we are all on this planet together, and that maybe, just maybe, and again, I realize I'm being a naive idealist, but if we stop demonizing the other, then we can still utilize the anonymity. But I think the negative repercussions of that and some of the downsides that we talked about, they're never going to go away. I'm not so blind as to think that will ever happen. But we can start realizing, hey, if I'm attacking someone on the other end of this computer forum exchange, that's another person. That is another human being. That is a fellow human being. And they are worthy of at least some base level of respect and understanding. And again, it's pie in the sky thinking. And I know Matt is certainly not an idealist. I know that from many years of discussing things with him. And he's probably sitting there shaking his head going, yeah, and pigs will fly. But I think maybe this is the sort of thing that can spur that kind of discussion, because this is global and this is far reaching beyond anything that we could possibly have expected or anticipated. And this is the sort of event where you start to see a global shift. And I'm hoping that we see a global shift, and maybe that will have an underlying impact on some of the things that we use anonymity for, and potentially have an impact on the ways in which we use anonymity. And just in general, the way in which we speak to each other, which includes anonymity.
Oh, you just mentioned the idealism, and I know I've said this before. I do not recall if I've said it on the podcast itself, but it's something I believe, because I'll admit I'm a cynic. But what does that mean? Scratch a cynic and you'll realize that they're a wounded idealist. So I don't mind wearing.
You have said that on the show, and you've said it, to me personally on many occasions. So.
Yeah. The only reason I say it that way is I don't mind having the scars when I've been burned by my idealism, and it's a lesson learned. But that doesn't mean that the idealism went away. It just had to remain a little secret for a little while.
Well said. So as we're wrapping up, Matt, you got anything else you want to add?
I think we can go home on that.
So Matt, normally when we have guests on, typically they're creators or they're other fellow mental health professionals, et cetera. We give them an opportunity. Is there anything you want to plug? This your shot to speak to fellow fans or promote anything that you care to?
I unfortunately have nothing going on right now. I am a parent of two small toddlers, and that tends to consume pretty much all of my time. So thank you for the opportunity, and just thank you guys both for having me on this show. This was a lot of fun. Definitely took me back to the old days, Anthony.
Anytime. Glad I can help you revisit some of that nostalgia. So this being the end, we're going to wrap up. So coming up the next couple of weeks, we'll be back to more regular type episodes. So we've got The Shredder as requested by Brian. We've got Dick Grayson as requested by Ariel, because it's a member of the Bat family. So naturally Ariel will request it. And Laura Kinney, aka X23, as requested by Ruby. And somewhere after Shredder, definitely, but I'm not sure exactly where it's going to slot in, we will have another Mental Health Avengers episode. This will be Age of Access Part 2. We are recording it next week. We'll have to then confer with the other Avengers and find out when we're going to drop it. But that will be coming up at some point, like I said, after Shredder, maybe directly after Shredder or at the very least after Dick Grayson. But so that is the lineup coming up for the next couple of weeks. So as always, you can find us on the various socials at Capes on the Couch. We are available wherever podcasts can be found. Our email address is capesonthecouch@gmail.com. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/capesonthecouch, where you can subscribe and get some additional excellent content like Matt has been getting low these many months. And we have our TeePublic store, as we alluded at the top of the show. We've got a new design coming out shortly. So if you go to teepublic.com and you search for Capes on the Couch, you'll find our store. And hopefully by the end of the month of April, we will have a new design on. So you can slap that on mugs or t-shirts or hoodies or what have you. And if you listen to us on a platform that allows you to rate, like, and review, please do so. Especially Podchaser or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. And if you send us an email at capesonthecouch@gmail.com with a screen cap of your review and your address, we will send you a sticker as a way of saying thank you. So that's going to about do it. Matt, again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Fantastic episode. And I can't wait to find out what you've got in store for us next. And as always, I'm sure it's going to be a thrilling and very interesting deep dive into a theme, because I love your theme episodes. Yorick Brown was fun, but the theme episodes, they give us a little bit of a break from the norm, so we definitely appreciate them. And again, thanks for taking the time out on an evening to speak with us.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Doc, anything you got to say before we leave?
I had something that may have been one of the most profound statements in mankind's history, but it is now redacted.
Interesting. Well, for Matt and Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.